Writing Out Loud, a program designed to explore in-depth interviews with writers to hear that words have voices.
Hello everyone, I'm Teresa Miller and welcome to Writing Out Loud. My very special guest today is mega best-selling author Nicholas Sparks. Thank you for being here again, Nicholas.
Hey, thanks for having me.
It's so great to see you. Listen, all these books, all this success, when did you know you wanted to be a writer?
Oh, I'm hoping that day comes one day. It's just kind of, I don't know. If you ask my college, people I knew in college, they'd say I knew in college. But even though I might have said that, I don't think I ever believed that I could be a writer until until I quit my real job. So it was after the publication of the Notebook, and I felt, and I was well on my way to finishing Message in a Bottle. I said, hey, gosh, maybe I got something here.
You actually went to college on a track scholarship, didn't you?
Yeah, I did.
And
I
then
used to be fast.
Well, you're still pretty fast. And then there was sort of a fortuitous accident.
Well, an injury. Yeah, I got injured, and it was after my freshman year in college. I was injured my freshman year, and it was an overuse injury. And so in between my freshman and sophomore year, I couldn't run. And if you're a runner and that's all you love, you kind of go a little bit crazy. And so I ended up writing a novel that first summer in between my freshman and sophomore year, primarily to see if I could do it because I had nothing else to do because, as I said, I was going a little bit crazy.
What were some of the lessons you still needed to learn at that point as a writer?
Oh, well, probably how to write well. I mean, I think that's the biggest one. You got to learn how to write well.
Yeah.
And what's the secret to that? It goes to everything from story to the style to how to do particular elements, like how to create suspense or how to create drama or how to make very realistic dialogue. All of that, it was a very first-time effort, which is why, of course, it's never been published. And and I read, though. I was always reading novels, and I tended to read novels with an eye toward what authors were doing well. And so when I sat down years later to write The Notebook, I had a pretty good idea of the author whose style I loved, and I said, gosh, if I could write like this guy, this would be great. And so I went ahead and gave it my fair shot. Now, I would tell you who that is, of course, because that's always the next question.
Yes, it is.
But I think I don't want to embarrass him or perhaps insult him. He's actually an incredibly reviewed author by the New York Times, regarded as kind of a literary writer. And if he says, oh my gosh, he thinks he writes like me, I don't want to insult him. How's that?
You mentioned you worked at several different jobs before you became a writer. I mean, you were in real estate, pharmaceuticals, you even waited tables for a while.
Yeah.
Do you think that varied experience has helped you reach a broader audience?
No. I think that varied experience, though, helped me hone in on what I wanted to do with my life, and that was really important at that time. I like a lot of people, and I was 22, I graduated from college. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do for the next 40 years.
Sure, I still don't know.
Exactly, right? And so those were three very interesting years where you're trying out things. You're finding out, gosh, do I want to work in an office, or do I want to be more my own boss? Do I want to have, kind of my own boss? You don't, like a sales rep. Do I want to, and I was able to really hone in on who I was as a person. So it was a really good growth period for me. I was, of course, poor as a church mouse throughout this, but wasn't unhappy. I was married. We ended up having a child, but I don't think that is what helped to create the kind of novels that I do.
Let's talk about The Notebook. Did you have any idea when you were working on that novel that it was going to be the blockbuster it became?
You can hope. I thought it was pretty good, I mean, when I was working on it, by the time I got to the final copy, I thought it was a pretty good novel, and I thought it would move people. I wasn't sure of that, so you hope for it, and I don't think you can ever expect it, but it was one of those things. And The Notebook did very well the first year, but this is a novel that you can still get in hardcover today.
Yeah.
You can still go, if you go on internet or you order it from your local bookstore, you can actually get it in hardcover. None of my other books, once they're out of hardcover, so The Notebook just kind of has been the Energizer Bunny. So I think over the last 15 years, it's probably sold close to 20 million copies or something like that. Who can ever expect something like that?
It's just extraordinary. I'm holding the 15th anniversary edition.
Yeah.
When you look back at the book now, do you see it any differently?
There are parts, it became what I wanted it to become, even at that time. This was not a novel that you understand that I wrote. It was a novel that I pieced together. I mean, this thing was substantially edited. The first draft was 80,000 words. It ended up being published at 52,000. And I did all those edits. I'm the one who cut and sharpened it. I remember when I wrote the final section when Noah was older, it was just a big jumbled mess. And I remember literally numbering paragraphs and writing, okay, one that's a little bit about health, and this is about his memories, and this and that. Then I started lumping all the health paragraphs together and moving them around. I mean, it was written and then pieced together and structured, so it took much longer to edit than to write. And this was, of course, prior to getting an editor. So just one of those things.
Well, it's more than one of those things. Talent's a big factor in it. But what do you think it is about the story that gives it such staying power?
That's what people want. You know, everyone wants to be loved forever. You know, that's what the story is. It's about a guy who loves a girl forever. And if you're a woman, that's a wonderful thing. And if you're a guy, you want to think you can do that as well. You want to think that you meet someone who fills you with that spirit, right? You know, that ability to do such thing. And if you're a woman, of course, you want that as well. And then you add in the fact that Alzheimer's is a real issue, and many families have been touched. Not necessarily even, you know, it might be their neighbor's mother, for instance, or it could have been their grandparents. I can't tell you how many people I talk to when I go out on tour that, you know, they know of Alzheimer's, you know, and so you had all those elements in, and there you go.
And that's the magic. How involved were you with the movie production?
You know, I've become more involved over the years. Involved too. I was certainly informed all along the way. Certainly went through all the scripts, but my skill, you know, is not in cinematography or direction. You know, those are not my skills. I don't do it. These types of things. So I have a pretty good ability to step. If someone's good at what they do, to step back and just let them do it, and I end up looking better in the process. So I'm the first one to say that The Notebook, that film, was really the vision of Nick Cassavetes, the director, of course Mark Johnson, Lynn Harris, the producers, and of course the cast.
Talk about two great actors, Gina Rowlands, James Garner. Did their performances change the way you see those characters?
No, I mean, no, they were good. You know, it's a film that, and I've been fortunate that I've liked all my films, but it's one of those films that when it 4 weeks ago, or before I left on tour, I walk in the door and my son is watching it with his girlfriend. Oh. And I said, Miles, it's like, what can I do, Dad? She likes it. You know, what do you do? It's one of those kind of films. And it's just one of those kind of novels.
The Notebook broke all kinds of publishing records. Were you nervous at all about following up on that kind of success?
Well, I don't think I let it get to that point, because prior to the publication of The Notebook, I was already working on Message in a Bottle. And, you know, I started it, you know, I made the decision. I started writing the summer before it came out. Then I went on this massive tour, and so I picked up again on it on the spring. And by that time, The Notebook had only been on the bestseller list, and it wasn't really high. It was like number 10, number 9, number 7. It had been on for maybe 12 weeks. And so then I just kept writing, and I ended up selling Message in a Bottle to film, to Warner Brothers, when it was only halfway done. And so then I'm like, okay, so it never got to the point really where I knew that. I said, well, you got to get something else out quick. I mean, the longer you wait, the higher the expectations get.
You did follow up on that early success. You mentioned Message in the Bottle. There's A Walk to Remember. Let's talk about some of your more recent books, starting with Dear John. This is set after 9/11, and there's the conflict between patriotic love and romantic love. How was that to work with?
Well, you have that, but really, Dear John was really inspired by two things. Number one, it was my cousin Todd, Todd Vance, who was a sergeant. He was a striker, and he faced that exact dilemma. He's in the Army, ready to get out. 9/11 hits. He really feels the need to re-up, ends up losing his girl because of it. So it's part of that. And then the other half was Casablanca. This is just a modern-day version of
That's a great
of Casablanca. And I can't really explain why, but if you know that film and you know that Rick has these two tickets that will get the love of his life and her husband to safety, and his choice is, if I give him the tickets, I lose the girl. If I don't, I get the girl, but her husband dies. really, Dear John is very much that exact same scenario. It's just a modern, updated version of it.
Do you put yourself in those scenarios? Do you imagine what you would do given those options?
Yeah, I think you do whenever you're writing. You're creating these characters, and they have to come from somewhere, and it's all in your head. So bits and pieces of you fall into some of these elements. Sometimes characters do what you wouldn't do, but sometimes they do exactly what you do, and sometimes they do what you hope you'd do in that situation.
I was intrigued by John's father, who, had Asperger's syndrome.
Yeah.
What made you decide to weave that thread into the narrative?
I think it's something, it's in the news a lot, and yet, so many people are saying it's now diagnosed so much more frequently, and maybe it is more frequent, autism, Asperger's. Maybe it is, and I'm certainly no medical expert. But part of me thinks that there were lots of people like this in the past. We just called them, it was strange Uncle Ted, or he's a little quiet, or that kid's, he's an odd duck, he's a little weird. And they learned how to function anyway because, there was no, I guess, name associated with it, no syndrome. And, what happens when these people get older? I mean, so he worked a job that he could do as a postman, same thing every day, vary this, down the pike, and I was like, okay. And then what would happen if he had a kid like John?
Yeah. Your novel, The Last Song, was a little bit of a departure for you in that you wrote the screenplay before you wrote the book.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
Well, that worked because of Disney. I got a serendipitous phone call. I was thinking about doing a teenage girl story. It'd been a long time since I'd done a teenage story. And the previous one I'd done, A Walk to Remember, was about a teenage boy. So I said, I want to write a teenage girl story. And at that point in time, Disney just happened to call and say that Miley loved A Walk to Remember, and do I have anything for a teenage girl? I said, no, but it's funny. I'm trying to come up with a story. So I spent the next few weeks deciding on the story as a novel because I didn't know if they were going to like it or whatever. I said, okay. So then I went out to Los Angeles. I pitched a story to Disney, pitched a story to Miley. They loved it, and they said, okay, but she's only got this real short break in between Hannah Montana ending and her fall concert tour, so we got to film starting in May. So could you write the screenplay first? I said, sure. And so I wrote the screenplay because I'd already conceived the story, and then I basically used the screenplay as the outline for the novel.
Yeah. It's a coming-of-age story, and the lead character is estranged from her dad, and we
Sure.
work through all of that. You're a father.
Yeah.
What does this do to you personally? How does it impact you personally?
Look, Ronnie's a very typical teen. She's a teenager.
Yeah.
And teenage years, these are the years they're finding out who they are, and they're realizing that they're not just their parents, or their parents aren't perfect. And parents aren't perfect. And so there's this, the clash, it's inevitable. It's inevitable. It's part of growing up. And Ronnie was going through this. And so it doesn't make me feel anything. I've had two teenagers, and we go through it. And I just kind of sit back and say, you're a walking cliche. I mean, I don't necessarily say that, but this is what I think. I'm like, really? I thought you were a mature person, but you're going to be as cliched as everyone else. Okay. And I suppose I was as well. It's just part of what it is. Because if you're a teenager, the only ones who will accept the way teenagers sometimes act toward their parents, the only ones who will put up with that are their parents. Their friends wouldn't put up with it. No one, their girlfriend, their boyfriend, they wouldn't put up with it. Only the parents. And so it's got to go somewhere.
How involved are your kids with your work?
Not at all. Not at all.
Do they rush out and read your books?
No, heck no.
Really not?
No.
Do they show up in your books?
Well, their names do, yeah.
Their names do, but I mean the characters themselves.
No, they're too young.
You deal with even more intense family dysfunction in Safe Haven. Were you hesitant at all to write a darker story? At least your critics say it's darker than the usual Nicholas Sparks fare.
It's primarily a love story, like all my novels. It was actually Hollywood fell in love with it. It's going into production, I think, in March.
That's got to be exciting.
Oh yeah, that'll be exciting. And the lucky one comes out as a film in April. But Safe Haven, it's a love story. But if you're going to have a love story, you have to have what in my mind I term a story driver. In other words, what's happening in addition to the love story? We have 9/11. We have turtles hatching.
Right.
We have house remodeling and her getting married to someone, right? So you've got to have something else going on in the story. In other words, it just can't be about these people falling in love. So I built in an element of danger. and it worked.
Oh, it's exciting. It's a very intense book. You have such great insights into the process of writing, and I know you're very interested in working with students, and you contribute money to your alma mater to make that writing career possible.
Founded a school.
Founded a school. That's pretty darn impressive. What's the best advice you can give to other writers?
Read a lot. That's what you have to do. You have to read a lot, and you have to read with an eye toward what authors do well and what authors don't do well. And just because you might like a particularly good book doesn't necessarily mean it's a particularly well-written book. And you have to be you have to kind of develop a detachment. Is this great? Mm-hmm. And if so, why? If it's not great, if so, why? And little by little, I think you learn the process.
What do you think your strengths are as a writer?
I do my best to tell a story that I think people will like. Mm. And I try to tell it in such a way that it feels, they're actually, these novels are incredibly complicated to write to make them seem, to make them read as easily as they do.
They're very, very reader friendly.
And yet they are incredibly complex to do it that way.
What do you think are your weaknesses as a writer, things that challenge you?
Writing's hard. I just find it hard. And I guess if that would be a weakness, because I hear, Stephen King loves it. He finds peace in the process, or Nora Roberts writes all day, or Dean Koontz can't get away from the computer because they love it. I'm like, what's wrong with me? I find this hard. This is challenging. I guess that's my biggest weakness, is that as many novels as I've done, it hasn't gotten any easier.
I wondered about that, Nicholas, because in your latest novel, just released, The Best of Me, you say it was very difficult for you to write that book.
Oh my gosh, there were so many things. Okay, it's a reunion story. People who are in love, right, and then they reunite 25 years later. Okay, so I'm trying to develop a story between people who are friends and strangers at exactly the same time. Mm-hmm. They're in love, or they were in love, they're not in love, and they're building toward love all at the same time. They end up in love, but they're not lovers. It's a quiet book. It's set around a funeral, so you don't have big things to tag it on. They sit on the porch. They sit in the kitchen. They take a little walk. So there's nothing really, there's nothing big going on. You can't hang any dialogue. So how do you shift it? And then how do you make it feel real? And how do you make these emotions go real? Because of course she's married, and what you don't want to have the novel come across as a bored housewife story. So how do you avoid that? And so you throw all this together, and all right, here you go. Now what do you talk about? And what do you pin your conversations on? What do you do to keep the pages turning super quickly so the reader just can't tear themselves away? Because you can figure out how to do all these, but you got to do it in a way that also keeps those pages racing along. That's tough.
Yeah, well, of course it's tough. Shout out to your wife, Kathy.
Of course.
And it's making in all your books. How instrumental has your marriage been to your success?
I love my wife. I love my family, and they are important to me. But that's very distinct from my work at the same time. Neither my wife or I make it a big deal, so I don't necessarily tell her what I'm writing, or how'd it go? Oh, it went okay, or oh, it was a tough day. Oh, okay. And that's about the extent that we'll talk about it. She doesn't read them. She doesn't read them before anybody else or anything like that. So, I find a lot of stability in marriage. I'm a guy who likes to be married. Yeah. So, she gives me that fulfilling. But as far as like a career or success or whatever, she's a great person. She makes my life better in those ways. And I suppose in a way that affects, but she's not like one of these wives who lives to be part of the entertainment world or edits, that kind of thing.
In other words, you live a pretty normal life.
Yeah, pretty much.
It's not like we might imagine that you're not sequestered
there
somewhere.
There are times it's exactly what your wildest fantasy would be about my life as far as fans or whatever. But for the most part, yeah, it's a very normal life. I coached my local public high school track team. I go to church on Sunday. I'll go out to the supermarket. No big deal. It's a very utterly normal life.
And you know what everyone always says about you? In addition to loving your books, they always say that Nicholas Sparks is a nice guy. You're not one of those temperamental writer types.
No, I try not to be. Try not to be.
Even though The Best of Me has just come out, you've already got a movie for it in the works, and you're co-producing.
Went to #1, the whole bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's just wonderful. Tell us what the movie's going to be like.
Oh, the movie's going to be good. Let's see. As I said, The Lucky One, starring Zac Efron, comes out in April 2012. Safe Haven starts filming in March 2012, and The Best of Me starts filming in August 2012. So we're in various, each one is in different phases. So I'm gearing up, for instance, for a media tour on one, and I'm gearing up for casting on another, and I'm gearing up for screenplay work on the other. So you're in different phases.
When you have so many different things going on, is it hard for you to stay focused on your novels?
No. My novels always take the vast majority of my time, and that's the way it is. But that's a certain period of time during the year. I don't write every day of the year, for instance. There are days when I can't, and on the days that I can't write, maybe I don't know what to write, maybe I'm not in the mood to write, maybe I'm traveling, doing something else. Those are the times I do the other things.
We've been talking primarily about your fiction, but you've also written a book with your brother. Tell us about that. I just think that was so cool.
Yeah, I wrote a memoir, kind of a pseudo-memoir, 3 Weeks with My Brother. It's a story about brotherhood. It's a story about family, and I really got tired of. I'll tell you, I got tired of the modern American memoir.
Right.
What it was devolving into, and it was basically the only people who deserved memoirs were celebrities, politicians, or people with awful childhoods. And I said, well, that's not true. If you write it well, you can tell a good story, and people will like it. And so I did that. And yes, you might say, oh, well, you're an author, whatever. Very little about my career as an author in there. As I said, it's about brotherhood, it's about family.
When you were working on it, did you and your brother get to know each other in different ways?
Nah, we knew each other better. That's really what the book is about. It's about the power of brotherhood and how it sustains you.
So there weren't any big revelations that came from it.
No.
But it's an affirmation for sure. When you look back over your body of work, Nicholas, what do you see as your overreaching themes, the primary messages you want to get out to people?
Not that kind of a writer, not a message writer at all. I just, I don't, it's not what I do. What I try to do is to write a story the kind of story that people want to read, the kind of story that I would like to read. I try to, not only the story, but I try to write it in a way that people will want, I try to do it all into that. And that's really the sum total of it. And then you follow it with, whenever I head into my next novel, I say, gosh, can I top all the work I've previously done? Yeah. Those would be the only things.
What fascinates me about your work is the characters are so real to us. We feel like we know them. What kind of feedback do you get from your audience?
Just that.
Just that? We know these characters.
Absolutely. And and I think that's one of the draws of them, if I was to guess. These are characters that you do feel like you could know. And the dilemmas feel like they could be dilemmas that you could go through, or someone went through, or your neighbor's going through. That's essentially what I hear from people.
Do people sometimes get mad at you when things don't work out like they want?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Get lots of angry people.
But it's got to be gratifying. Don't you love that connection with your audience?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look. Not every. I do. It's a wonderful thing to have a connection to the audience, and that's why I tour. That's why I give speeches. It's why I do these things. It's because the people are, for the most part, great, and I enjoy them. And you have to know going in that not everyone's gonna think that everything you do is the best thing you've ever done. It just comes with the territory.
What are you working on now in terms of all these films? I mean, apart from
3
all these
films. I've got a television show I'm developing with ABC. I've got 2 television shows I'm developing with Warner Horizon. So two more. So 3 TV shows, 3 films, The Notebook for Broadway. And
Tell
then
us
some-
about that, The Notebook for Broadway. You sort of just slip that in. That's when you're really successful, is when you
Well,
can just slip that in as an aside. Oh, yeah, this is the Broadway production
Yeah,
of The
well,
Notebook.
we're working on that. You know, we're getting the production put together for that, and we'll see how it goes. You never know. You know, it's usually about an 18-month to 2-year process, and you got to get the right composer and the musician. The music's got to be just right, and a lot of decisions have to be made, and that's where we are.
What are you looking to within yourself as a writer? What do you want to accomplish still? That maybe has eluded you. It's hard to imagine that anything's eluded you. But
You know, I would like to write a novel that everyone says, that's it. It's the best work he's ever done. Even I say, boy, I could never top that. You know, then you're okay.
yeah. Well, one last thing I have to ask you about, Nicholas. You're an avid reader. You mentioned that at the top of the show. And you read, what, 100+ books a year?
At least.
What
At
are
least.
What are you reading now when you're out on tour?
Oh my gosh, I just read The Gates by John Connolly. It's more of a kid's book. I just read 11/22/63 by Stephen King. This is all in the last week and a half. The biography of Steve Jobs. If you've seen the Stephen King book and the Jobs book, you know they're very big. And right now I'm reading, I don't even know. I don't know who it is. Never heard of the author before, so I'm giving him a shot. So I'm sorry. It's
You're busy, you're reading,
Yeah.
you're living a wonderful life, Nicholas. It's great to have you with
Thanks.
us again. Thank you so much for sharing with us like you have. Congratulations on The Best of Me. And thank all of you for joining us on Writing Out Loud.